then transition into the 764 stuff. And before we do, was Bobby related to that at all? Was there any connection between the 764 online stuff and
not to 764 stuff?
Okay,
no.
he had another
There was
one.
some rumors that he was connected to Order of Nine Angles. The shooting was
right. Okay,
but I'm not gonna spoil the end of my book.
Cool. No, I don't want to do that on the show. So let's talk about 764 because you just recently posted. Speaking of our favorite people in the FBI, they actually recently tweeted out something about 764. And for those who've listened to our last episode with Becca, you know this is like what she does, and she knows all about this stuff. So what are these new? Why are they now so engaged in 764?
So the first FBI PSA came out in September of 2023.
Okay.
That's when we started to say, oh, we've seen this group around. Now we have a name. We didn't really know much about the group until the FBI released that. Since then, over the past, obviously, year and a half, 2 years, I've been increasingly drawn into this to the point that I basically became the sole public figure talking about it on the internet. And it was bizarre to me at first that nobody else was covering this except for, a couple of like Wired articles or whatever, Unicorn Riot, which like,
what is that?
Okay. It's like this. There's a lot of like really far leftist groups that cover like, but they always frame everything as far right extremism. It's really annoying.
Yeah.
So, there weren't a lot of people talking about it. And because of that, a lot of people didn't know about it. And that's problematic because parents of all people should know everything about this group and the dangers that your kids are facing. And, because what this group is doing is they're recruiting kids off of Roblox and Minecraft, and they're putting them in Discord servers and grooming them and then sexually exploiting them or sextorting them, or alternatively, turning them into abusers and recruiting them into these groups where they abuse other kids. I've talked to some parents recently who've come forward whose kids weren't just victims, they were abusers. And they had to learn by the FBI coming to their house that their kids were involved in this stuff, which is terrifying, right?
Wow.
It's a hard pill for a lot of parents to swallow that could actually happen. But in the same vein, these same groups are pumping out mass shootings and mass stabbings and that kind of stuff. And so I got involved, and eventually the news articles started to pick up, and then they started to contact me. But for some reason, the US media has barely touched this. So the media that was contacting me was the BBC, the CBC, Sky News Australia, the SVT, which is a Swedish state news, and a couple of others had all reached out to me for interviews. And actually, some of them have done more extensive pieces that haven't released yet. That feature me, which is really cool.
That's great.
And one thing I noticed about all that coverage that they're getting overseas is that they don't shy away from calling it Satanism. They call it what it is, a satanic pedophile network of online extortionists. Whereas in the US, they won't dare say that. They wouldn't dare.
What's that say to you? What does that say to you?
Well, I mentioned it to my BBC contact, Tony Smith from the BBC, who put out a really nice piece featuring me shooting guns and stuff recently. We talked about 764. And the BBC's been very engaged in following all of this because there's been a couple of terror attacks that were connected to the group in the UK. And I told Tony, I'm like, it's so refreshing that you guys call it satanic, call it Satanist. He's like, yeah. Obviously, like the U.S. doesn't do that. I'm like, no. He's like, that's strange. I'm like, yes, it is. It is strange, Tony.
It's super weird. They'll make SNL skits with Lady Gaga doing blood rituals with devils.
So strange,
but,
so weird.
They
I
refuse.
saw that earlier.
Yeah, it was very strange. But they won't talk about. Yeah, I think the only person recently I've seen talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, 764 was Andy No, but that was like extremely recently. I don't know if you saw it.
Did Andy talk about 764?
No,
the Zizians.
That's what it was. You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I had a lot of people tagging me in that
That's
to the point that I started to talk to Andy behind the scenes. And
cool.
There was kind of a fringe connection between the Zizians and 09A, but it was tenuous.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, he's definitely getting close to the same communities in that kind of work.
I guess he's not even in America, I guess. So he doesn't really count because that's still someone abroad. But back to 764, can you just give us like a overview of what is it? And so you said they're talking to kids online like Roblox, but do they have like a goal in mind?
Yes. So 764 is a harmful online network that specializes in grooming and extorting kids, especially young adults, for sexually explicit, videos and images. So the way this might look is that they might initially engage them and groom them and get them to send them some nude photos or something. And then they use that to extort them into producing more content, which gets more and more extreme over time. That content could be self-harm, where they ask the victim to take a blade and carve their abuser's name into their body, satanic symbols into their body, kill house pets on video, torture animals, all the way up to having these people commit suicide on camera, which has happened. There have been cases of young adults and kids committing suicide for this group on camera. And interesting, like it's kind of weird, but they do it. I would say there's layers to it, right? At the superficial layer, they're doing it for their own notoriety within the group. To see, it's a contest to see what kind of horrible stuff they can get people to do. But at a higher level, in the kind of the puppet masters pulling the strings here are people who I have termed satanic accelerationists. We've talked about accelerationism a bit, I think, before, which is basically this doctrine or set of tactics that people used in an attempt to accelerate the collapse of society. So you see this a lot in like certain white supremacy communities, or like the Atomwaffen division, where they want to attack infrastructure, derail trains, shoot power stations, and that kind of thing, in hopes that they can cause like destabilize society. You see them trying to get people to go commit mass shootings in order to destabilize society or get people to fight over guns, etc. And then in this case, you have the satanic accelerationists who honestly believe that by inspiring or provoking people to commit evil acts, they can increase the amount of evil in the universe and use it to power magic rituals to, open portals and stuff. So they actually have a whole spooky praxis that underlies their motivations for getting people to do evil things. And in this case, for 764, the goal is to corrupt the youth. They want to corrupt the youth and traumatize kids and get them to commit evil acts in the furtherance of their satanic agenda.
Would you say Charles Manson?
Which sounds crazy, but it's real.
No, it sounds totally real to me. Would you say Charles Manson was an early accelerationist?
Absolutely. Charles Manson was one of the first accelerationists. Obviously, he has roots too in the Process Church. And if you look into what the Process Church of the Final Judgment was about, they were kind of about the same thing, right? Accelerating the apocalypse.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like committing evil acts in furtherance of spurring on the apocalypse. And Charles Manson was absolutely an accelerationist. In fact, Charles Manson, after his arrest, continued to be an influencer in modern accelerationism by befriending James Mason, who they basically together, James Mason is the author of Siege, which is a white nationalist accelerationist book that he put together about decentralized cells and their usefulness in committing terror attacks. Charles Manson and James Mason became friends, and they created another group called the Universal Order, which looks a lot like the Process Church in terms of balancing of good and evil. So the influence of Manson was huge on Atomwaffen, and then all of the splinters and all of the things that came after Atomwaffen.
So I don't think everything that's bad is a product of our government creating it. But with that said, Charles Manson, for those who know, like Chaos, MK Ultra stuff, was a product, as far as we know, of some MK Ultra programs. Do you connect any of that kind of stuff, like a modern day MK Ultra situation, to 764?
Well, it's certainly not limited to the U.S., right? Because like the founder of Order of Nine Angles, David Mayotte, and the founder of the Process were both in the U.K. I think that there's been a lot of rumors that David Mayotte was a British intelligence asset, but over time, having spoken with this man, and also just deep, I've really dug deep into some of these origins of the Order of Nine Angles, and like once you pierce through that veil of spooky shadowiness that they've created for themselves, you realize that a lot of that stuff they made up about themselves to seem spooky and creepy. And I think that the rumors of Mayotte being an intelligence asset are similarly concocted by him to try to push out this kind of narrative about himself being spooky, right? And so for Manson, for sure, I think that I guess it's still a mystery, and we'll probably never know the truth, right? I think as much of the truth that's ever going to come out has already come out.
Yeah.
But definitely around that time, it wasn't limited to Manson. The CIA was very, very heavily involved in the creation of cults and alternately of our perception of those cults. So they wanted cults to be things that we were afraid of. They wanted to use them as ways to control people's opinions about things. And it was definitely the product of MK Ultra behavioral modification experiments. I do believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that destructive cults came out of that. Yes.
Sounds like something a pretty powerful cult would do, to create other cults and then make you afraid of cults while also being like, it's not us, we're the good guys.
The problem is that it's got, at this point, people always ask me like, well, is all the feds, right? I'm like, no, believe it or not, the people who are getting arrested are like 15-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Or some of these even bigger shadowy figures who are getting arrested, be like the example of the guy who went by Butcher from MKY, who was arrested in Moldova. So like, no, the FBI isn't this dude in Moldova. He's not a 15-year-old kid. Like what happened is that whatever role they played in the early, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on has spiraled out of control.
Yeah.
It's just metastasized, and now it's a completely decentralized movement online that could capture anyone and anyone's kids. It's definitely pretty insidious. I don't think that there's like I don't want to give the FBI too much credit by saying that they're like manufacturing all this. I think that they're largely incompetent, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, I think it's probably both. Largely incompetent while also having some deep roots and some pretty bad stuff that like a small amount know about. But I say this about MK Ultra as well, and we can apply it to this. Like you're saying, people are just MK Ultraing themselves now. It seems like, it's like they don't have to be in the experiment in the laboratory to be MK Ultra. It's just we're doing it to ourselves with everything we do. So why is the FBI? It seems like, do they have a renewed interest in 764? Has something happened recently where they're like, we're back on it?
I don't know. I like to think it was because of me complaining loudly, but I'm sure there was more to it than that.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
I probably submitted over 200 cyber tips over the course of a year.
Wow.
And I advocated. I went on big podcasts and InfoWars and big podcasts and said, like, why isn't the FBI doing enough about this? And then all of a sudden it seemed like boom, 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 boom. They started falling like dominoes, and we started getting so many arrests that I couldn't even keep up with them. Like, I just want to tweet about them. I could barely keep up with these court cases. There's over 20 that I'm tracking right now.
Wow.
And I think that for one thing, when I'm thinking about it rationally, right, it takes a while for them to build cases, especially when it's stuff that just took place online. You have a lot of online forensic work that needs to be done before you can actually get a search warrant and an arrest warrant. Online crimes are much more difficult to prosecute than real life crimes.
Yeah.
And so I think that the lag had to do with the fact that they opened a whole lot of cases and investigations, and it took them that long, because they were busy like arresting people for January 6th, obviously, right? Like 20% of their workforce is busy doing that. Yeah. So, I still think it's unacceptable for it to take 2 years to build a case against one of these people. That needs to change. Yeah. But I think that's also why we're seeing an uptick in the attention right now.
Yeah. Well, it's good. I mean, I think I point a lot of people to our last episode, especially parents, because of the way these cults infiltrate children's minds through what a lot of parents just see as innocuous, innocent, things like Roblox, I'm like, no, you got to really like be on top of what your kids are doing online.
Yeah.
Because it's really dark.
I have people who message me and they're like, I saw your work and I told all of my friends to not let their kids on Roblox anymore. And I'm like, that's awesome. You could have saved a kid. Honestly, it's that simple. It's just getting the message to the parents. And, the FBI putting out PSAs is good, but there needs to be honestly, like a public awareness campaign would be something that I would totally support. Yeah. Something like a formal address to every parent in the country to let them know that you need to helicopter your kids' online presence because of XYZ, or like, how the people come into your kid's school and they talk to your kids about like good touch and bad touch and stuff like that when you're younger. In the same vein, we should be teaching our kids about online safety and how to protect themselves online. And at age appropriate levels, we should be teaching them this is what grooming looks like. This is a real life story of a victim. Here's her story. Like, watch a video. Talking about what these people do, because they ruin these kids' lives forever. These kids will never be the same. And
a lot of them, like what you were saying, maybe not a lot of them, but some of them grow up to then just become the thing that hurt them, which is like this cyclical evil. It's so horrible.
A lot of these people who are getting arrested, like Cameron Finnegan, who went by the username Acid, he's the one that had been threatening me. And I had an open case against him as well because of the threats. But he was in the UK. So when the judge sentenced him, they were taking into account like his abusive upbringing and all of the things that had happened in his life and his developmental issues, which is sad and all, but still, bro, you're a grown ass adult who's a pedophile and abused a bunch of kids. So it's hard for me to feel sorry. It's like a dog that you take out behind the farm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I mean,
but
I have
also
no
the
sympathy
judge
for that.
read my name out in the British High Court, which was shocking. I had people messaging me all over the place, and I was just like in shock. I was like, I can't believe that they actually read that out during the sentencing, but they did.
Well, you've definitely been making an impact, and for anyone who doesn't follow you on Twitter, they might not know that you are constantly attacked by psychopaths trying to get at you online, and the messages you get are pretty wild.